SOS! They're taking us! I hope that this is not just a cry for help, but that we can alert everyone who's going through this abduction process. Many abductees are placed under a hypnosis process, a type of memory suspension, so that there is no memory of these attacks when people are taken from their homes after the experiments and manipulations.
I had direct contact with 8 agents during the trainings in my childhood, but I will talk about only 4 of them at this moment, as there is a monitoring system observing each step and each information that we disclose here. I will give each of them a pseudonym so that we do not suffer attacks. Our contact was through the process of telepathy. There were few exchanges of words, as we were stimulated to use our minds when we were taken to the Oval Room. The 4 agents that I will comment on are the North American, Jeremy; the Russian, Olga; the Brazilian, George; and the Indian, Nandip. About Jeremy. Jeremy, the North American boy, was a little more reserved. I often saw him sad and isolated. For some reason, he seemed to awaken his conscience inside the room and always cried a lot. It was as if he knew something bad could happen at any moment, as he was always apprehensive. It seemed that he was more aware than we were, that he was aware of what was happening, and was trying to close himself off against the experiments. As he was easy to go back and forth in some timelines, the room coordinators invested more time in him, and when he felt sad, they put him together with 2 dogs that he loved. I don't know exactly, but I believe that one of those dogs actually existed in his story, and they were taken to this place to calm Jeremy. Sometimes he would be taken to another room, separated from us for a while, and after some intervention, he would come back to play with the Legos, which were actually the cubes. About Olga. Olga, the Russian girl, had an enormous ability to project herself into other minds. She was with me for a few moments when I was very little, and we were in the same room with that woman who was picking me up. Both she and I had this connection with the apparatus that was very familiar to us, the sphere, where our minds were trained to move in places, and even inside the minds of some people, and we could map and go to any place they sent us. We were required to monitor everyone in the Oval Room. They usually put us in a type of game, which was actually more than a simulator. It was a technological apparatus that housed the consciousness of boys and girls, and took them to any moment in human history, and even to other planets or dimensions where these soul fractals had already experienced. When we were placed in this equipment, the scientists in this room could enter these locations unnoticed, and from us and our ancestry, they trace files that were in our stellar consciousness. Thus, they were able to strategically monitor other groups and copy some codes that belonged to different races in the universe. About George. George, the Brazilian boy, was the one I had the most contact with. Because I'm Brazilian and we speak the same language, I was able to sometimes talk to him in the Oval Room when they returned us in the timeline as children to what we call the interstellar temporal portal. Leon, when he first contacted me introducing himself as a sidereal friend, it was George that he took me to visit in Sao Paulo. George was monitored by a race that managed to map and access his arrival on Earth in his first incarnation. This happened when he was on a mission after the intervention at Zeta Reticuli and the war to gain control over the mental communication technology, which I have explained previously. George is part of this group of fractalized creator sons who were betrayed and are living the human experience. He was of great importance in history. For the few times he had access to his star family, he opened rifts and portals to try to make the jump from here. But he was discovered and imprisoned again in a location in the timeline, so as not to wake up and not be found by his stellar family. George, before being betrayed and falling here, was called the Eye of the Great Consciousness, or Son of Horus. He manifested with an energetic body, and by a type of hologram, he presented himself with a head of a hawk and an eye that glowed very brightly. This eye was a manifestation, and like a camera, read the energies and experiences in the locations, and sent the information straight to the mothership, replicating it to the Senate and to the laboratories where a matrix dismantling project was being planned. In the oval room of the experiments, every time George was triggered, they used the ability he had to see multiple dimensions, and with that, he had the ability to open rifts and portals. About Nandip. Nandip, the Indian boy, was younger, but he had abilities beyond normal. He started walking and talking earlier than other children. At the age of 3, he was already talking about other experiences he had in other incarnations, remembering the last 2 in detail. After being taken to a spiritual leader, guru, in his region, he was recognized as the reincarnation of a deva, receiving differentiated attention. He followed the Hindu tradition, studied all the laws and traditions of his people daily, and stood out, with the ease of recording and understanding all the teachings. Nandip loved being in the temple of Ganesha and practiced meditation, which increased his potential even more. While in the oval room, Nandip was trained to use his consciousness projection and bilocation capabilities. When he accessed a certain level of frequency, he created an energy field around him, his aura expanded, and everyone felt embraced by that energy. It was an incredible moment, as everyone who was on its perimeter began to feel their bodies resonating with his frequency, which induced a projection of everyone's consciousness with great ease, and even remote viewing was possible for those who didn't have this ability. It was Nandip who made it possible for our group of agents to make the travels, while Olga and I were coupled in his mind to monitor everyone, because wherever Nandip's level of consciousness was, there everyone else would be. Even though we were all in distant territories, the timeline was the same for everyone in many missions. When they needed to move through a different timeline with a specific group or agent, it was Nandip that gave them the possibility to jump. The equipment in the room read his neural network, and he transported the agent. Many times, Jeremy, who worked returning in the timeline, had his support. Each of us who became aware of the Oval Room project understood everything that was going on and why they were monitoring us for so long and so many times within our last incarnations on this planet. When we reached a certain age, we were separated into groups of 9 children. Of course, there was a reason for that, mainly because of the potential that each one had, as I mentioned. They mapped the family and consanguineous ancestry of each one, or we would be incarnated, and the stellar ancestry of before we arrived on Earth. They did this with a type of technology that scanned and manipulated us still during pregnancy, messing with some part of our human genome that could unlock some perceptions or psychic abilities. But the fractals that mattered most to them were a certain group of fractals of Creator's sons, Elohim, commanders and agents, linked to the engineers of the construction and expansion of the universe, who were compulsorily placed on this planet by some kind of trap, fall, or betrayal. The scientists linked to the Draco project, who coordinated the Oval Room experiments, disguised as good agents, had been studying each of these Creator's sons for a long time, who were fractalized as children incarnated on this planet. Even in the moments they were out of the body, between one incarnation and another, they were always forced to enter the incarnation wheel through an archontic project, and on each return, they were used and manipulated by the reptilian and gray scientists under the orders and command of the Dracos to serve 2 sinister agendas. The first agenda is to imprison and guard these Creator sons, as well as prevent them from accessing their star families and capabilities completely. The second agenda is the manipulation of a group of humans, starting with hybridization, for the Draco project that I have already explained. For the agenda to follow, monitoring was fierce, because often when scientists realized that some humans could awaken the conscience of their true essence, or if they were in contact with their ancestral network, the demiurges took the lead in the program and put in other jailers. For this, the demiurges used copies of angels or benevolent beings to carry out the reprogramming and cleaning of the consciousness and the return to the bodies in the biological experience, leaving us in terrible situations, in primitive places, with diseases and physical problems to limit our abilities, and using dogmatic, religious, and cultural control, so that we are always under pressure and pain, to the point that we don't even have time to wake up, or the peace to open our consciousness. They began to create holographic chambers, to leave us in a state of control and suspension, under the dominion of the archons. Thus, with each return to the physical body, cleanings were made in the program called the Veil of Oblivion, for the loss of any reference and connection with the true structure of each one. In the 18th century of our era, a force from outside our local universe, coming from the central hub of the source, or the primordial royal house, along with part of what we call the great cosmic consciousness, and stellar beings, ancients of dawn, seraphim, archangels, cherubim, and angels, sent their representatives, who assumed the role of support for all humanity, and began to take advantage of the project of the negative ones, to wake up within this program. At one point, a group of humans started to wake up and understand their mission and why they were trapped in this situation, and they no longer accepted any explanation from the religious leaders. At that moment of humanity, the first movements began that would start so many initiatic schools. But a part of humans, when they recognized their stellar ancestry, or when they accessed a small part of their potential, became gurus and pseudo-masters, selling their absolute truth, and that those who did not serve them would be lost and alone within the Earth experience. With that, the AI, the demiurges, the archons, the reptilians, the greys, and the dracos, who were at the forefront of the sinister project, used this false awakening to create the worst of traps, the ego. So the ego was encouraged in these humans, who were fertile ground for the manipulation of the false light. Their minds were being manipulated, and led more and more to see themselves as the chosen ones, as a super medium or a god incarnated on Earth, and that only they had the absolute truth. The project was well elaborated, using the very minds of those awakened ones, letting them feel small powers and magnetism over the mass, receiving distorted channelings, and putting the false awakened ones against each other, so that they would destroy themselves within their own conceptions and false truths. These masters, gurus, and religious, who have fallen into their own ego, are dominating the internet networks with false flags and selling salvation, selling a seat in their spaceships, and yelling that anyone who doesn't follow them will be beheaded by their justice swords under the rule of a sovereign god, but who attacks with anger, pain, diseases, wounds, kills, separates, and destroys families and people who do not fit in his guidelines. Unfortunately, they are creating prisons and holographic worlds, chambers of illusions, and when the physical body is gone, these masters and their followers will be in a loop, created by their own minds, living the same story for millennia, and serving as food for the demiurges and their allies.
Attention Earthlings. Sorry for the interruption, but we need to transmit this message. Some scientists, including my team and I, became somewhat disconnected from our species group neural network just before we left our planet. This made it possible for us not to be mentally invaded by the Dracos and their AI god and continue acting on our own with our usual ethics. Unfortunately, this was not the reality for most. Some of us were completely absorbed by the draconian minds and were manipulated to the point of creating clone versions of ourselves, which only serve as biological robots in the service of their sick collective mind. Servants who do the dirty and dangerous work in place of their masters, but who are empty shells. They don't have a conscience inhabiting their bodies. Even with our species divided, we were still accountable to our Senate. It was they who, once again, made a new agreement to work together with the Dracos for the solution of the common problem regarding the genetic code of our species, because we had developed the virus, but not the antidote. Our joint effort discovered that it would be necessary to find a species in our universe that was free of nanotechnology so that we could reprogram our DNA. The challenge was to find a species that was compatible with our genetic code, and that would collaborate with us, something that some of our colleagues didn't care about. Yes, that species was the human, and the chosen planet was Earth. But it was very difficult, especially in the beginning, because humans were very primitive, and several interventions were necessary, including on the planet, because there were various natural predators for the species here. Since then, several delegations, with numerous genetic projects, have been working on the planet. Some bring together Dracos, reptilians, and Zetas to fulfill this common agreement between Senates. Others have Dracos and reptilians in charge, and are Zeta's brothers completely mentally dominated, who aim to solve the problem at any cost. Finally, a third type, to which I belong. Zetas with independent research, who act ethically and comply with the law, as we have always done. Since we were trapped in the Earth's electromagnetic field, when the frequency barrier came along, some of our fellows have volunteered to incarnate on the planet as humans, so that our research and development in the field was possible. That way, we don't necessarily need to abduct people against their will. Although our consciences do not know who we are when we incarnate, and in countless times, the process can be temporarily traumatic. We are aware of this. But we try to do our work with minimal impact, including alliances and allies in the process. Unlike some of our colleagues, we care about the well-being of humanity and do not want to interfere negatively in the evolution of the planet and the species. On the contrary, if we can contribute, we will. The message is, not all Zetas, or Greys as you call us, are negative or mean to harm you. We all want to solve a problem that was created for us, and that could lead to the extinction of our species. But we want to do this ethically, and with respect for all forms of life. We understand the prejudice with our appearance for all the trauma generated by others of our kind. Unfortunately, not everyone thinks like us. But rest assured that, just as there are ethical and unethical humans, there are also ours. Duality is a reality of our experiential frequency zone. End of transmission.